Welcome to our deep dive into modern relationships.
Mhm.
We're going to tackle how to navigate conflict and make conscious choices in a world that, honestly, sometimes feels like it's just drowning in options.
Mhm.
And you guys, you really picked some amazing source material. That Jay Shetty interview with Esther Perel, so much wisdom there.
It's such a good conversation. Yeah. You know, what really stood out to me was how Perel goes beyond just like giving us these tips for relationships and actually helps us see like those the deeper patterns going on. Like that's where the real aha moments are, right? And
Yeah.
that's where we can really start to like make real change.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
She starts by talking about accountability. And I don't know about you, but that really hit home for me. I mean, it's so easy to blame our partner when things get tough.
Sure.
But Perel kind of flips the script and asks, what can I do differently?
Yeah. It's so powerful to shift that perspective, right? Like instead of feeling stuck, feeling resentful, you suddenly start to see, oh, okay, I actually have a role to play in this whole dynamic.
Right. You're not just a victim of circumstance.
Exactly. In fact, Perel even shares this funny story about managing frustration in the car with her husband.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
It's a good one.
You know that story about misdirected frustration in the car? It really got me thinking about how often we kind of just like, I don't know, take things out on the people closest to
Well,
us.
totally.
It's like a reflex almost.
It's a very human reflex, definitely, and I think it highlights like how important it is to build self-awareness in relationships. Like if we can just pause for a second, and recognize where our frustration is like really coming from, then we can choose a different way to respond. We don't have to just react.
So recognizing our own role is like, that's a great first step.
Yeah.
But how do we get beyond those little surface level fights and understand what's really at the heart of the conflict?
Well, Perel talks about this difference between fighting for versus fighting about. Like,
Yeah.
think about those classic arguments over the dishes, right?
Oh, yeah.
On the surface, it seems like it's just about like, who's doing their fair share. But a lot of times it's like it's masking a deeper need.
Yeah, like feeling respected or appreciated.
Exactly. Like even Jay Shetty shares his own experience with the dishes. It was clashing family habits, and it created all this tension in his relationship.
It's funny how something so mundane can become a battleground.
It is, but it makes sense when you think about those deeper needs that are at play.
Totally.
And Perel, she identifies like 3 core issues that often fuel conflict, right? It's power, trust, and value. And I think recognizing like which of these is at the heart of your disagreements can be like such a game changer.
So true. Okay, so we've got accountability and we've got understanding the why behind our conflicts. But what happens when we're already in the thick of it? Like how do we stop ourselves from getting swept up in that whole reactive cycle of blame and defensiveness?
That is the question. And that's where curiosity comes in. Perel, she encourages us to shift from just reacting to reflecting. Instead of pointing fingers, we can pause and ask ourselves, what am I feeling right now? What might my partner be feeling?
So it's more about like trying to understand than judging,
Exactly.
replacing that judgment with curiosity.
Yeah. It actually reminds me of this concept called the fundamental attribution error, which is it's this tendency we have where we view our own negative behaviors as situational. But when our partner does something we don't like, we think it's just, who they are, their personality.
That's so interesting. Can you explain that a little bit more for our listeners?
Sure. So let's say you snap at your partner, right? You might excuse your behavior by saying, oh, I had a stressful day. But if your partner snaps at you, you might think, wow, they're being so inconsiderate.
Oh, wow, I totally do that.
We all do. It's like we give ourselves a pass, but we hold our partners to a completely different standard.
It's so true. Like it's making me think about all those times I've felt frustrated and just like immediately jumped to conclusions about my partner's intentions.
Right. We all do it, but by like, starting to be more aware of it, we can actually start to challenge those assumptions and create space for understanding.
So much good stuff here. But I have to ask, what about like the fear of losing ourselves in a relationship? That worry about like having to sacrifice your individuality just for the sake of, keeping the peace.
Yeah, I think that's a really common fear. And Perel actually addresses that directly. She talks about how one partner often fears abandonment while the other fears suffocation.
It's that classic push and pull.
Right, exactly. And she's not advocating for like, one person sacrificing their needs for the other. Instead, she suggests that couples create what she calls a unified agreement.
Hold on. A unified agreement. What does that even mean?
It's about creating like a shared vision for the relationship, but
Yeah.
not by like, one person imposing their values on the other. It's more about like influencing each other and building something new together.
So it's not about becoming like clones of each other, but
Oh,
finding a
yeah.
way to blend your individualities into something that works for both of you.
Right, exactly. Even Jay Shetty, he shares a great example of this. He talks about proactively communicating with his wife about stressful weeks, so they can support each other and avoid unnecessary conflict.
Makes sense. It's like you're kind of being proactive and creating that foundation of understanding from the start.
Exactly.
So we've talked about accountability, understanding those deeper needs that are driving our conflict, and cultivating curiosity.
Hmm.
But how do we actually like have those deeper conversations, especially if one partner tends to just, shut down when things get a little too emotional?
That's such a good question, and it is something Peril addresses, head on. She suggests getting creative, like using prompts, maybe from games or movies or even songs to kind of like open up those conversations.
So instead of just asking those direct questions that might feel a little too intense, confrontational,
Right.
we can find those roundabout ways to approach those sensitive topics.
Exactly, yeah. It's about creating that safe space for, real vulnerability.
Yeah.
And Peril gives this great example of using a card from that game, Where Should We Begin,
Oh, I love that game.
as a conversation starter.
What was the prompt? Do you remember?
It was someone who impacted your life and doesn't know it.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. It's such a beautiful way to kind of just spark a meaningful conversation without, putting someone on the spot.
I love that. Yeah, it takes the pressure off
Yeah,
and allows for that more organic, heartfelt conversation.
totally.
Speaking of vulnerability, let's talk about breakups.
Ooh.
They're a part of life, right?
Yeah.
And they can be so incredibly painful, even when you know it's the right decision to end things.
Absolutely.
Oof, breakups. There's like even when you know it's over, there's still that that lingering sadness,
Yeah.
that wondering like what if.
It's so true. And Pearl, she makes this interesting point about this. She says that every choice we make comes with a loss.
Mm.
And it's important to acknowledge and actually grieve the path not taken.
That's so profound. It's like
Mhm.
we're grieving that potential future we had in our minds, even if, it wasn't realistic
Yeah.
or ultimately what we wanted.
Right. She even shares this story about a man who left his wife, was about to remarry, but then like found himself drawn back to that former relationship.
Right.
It's like it just highlights how complex, human emotions are,
Yeah.
and how even like seemingly final decisions can be revisited.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that relationships aren't always, black and white. There are nuances, there's complexity. We can't always predict what's going to happen. Switching gears a little bit, what about rebuilding trust after like a major betrayal,
Yeah.
like infidelity?
Mm-hmm.
Is that even possible?
Perel believes it is possible, but it takes a lot of dedicated work from both partners. And she outlines like these 3 stages for rebuilding trust: expressing remorse, becoming the what she calls the vigilante of the relationship,
Okay.
and co-creating a new vision for the future.
I'm intrigued by that term, vigilante.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that looks like in practice?
Sure. It's about the person who broke the trust, like taking ownership and demonstrating like this deep commitment to repair.
Yeah.
It's not about waiting for their partner to bring it up,
Right.
It's about like proactively acknowledging the pain they caused and taking those concrete steps to rebuild.
So it's about moving beyond just words, right?
Yeah.
And into action.
Yeah.
Really showing through your behavior that you're truly remorseful and committed to making things right.
Exactly. And there's this powerful quote from Perel that really stuck with me. She says, "The biggest victory on this kind of hurt is the ability to love again, to trust again. You did not take that from me. That is probably your biggest vengeance, is to be happy."
Wow, that's powerful. It speaks to the resilience of the human heart
Yeah.
and the potential for healing even after such a deep betrayal.
Mhm.
Okay, I want to shift gears now and talk about modern dating. It's like we're constantly bombarded with choices, right?
Yeah.
Like dating apps, social media. It's like they're showing us what we're supposedly missing.
It's true. And Pearl, she calls this the paradox of choice. Like we have more options than ever before, but it actually leads to a lot of dissatisfaction and this feeling of not enough.
Yeah, it's like that feeling of I could do better.
Yeah.
That keeps you swiping and searching, even when you come across someone who's, like, amazing.
Right. She actually uses this term romantic consumerism to describe this whole phenomenon.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. It's like we're treating potential partners like products,
Yeah.
constantly evaluating, comparing, instead of appreciating, the unique qualities that each person brings to the table.
It's like we're looking for the perfect product, not a real human being with flaws and complexity.
Right. And I think this mindset actually sets us up for a lot of disappointment.
Yeah.
Because, we're constantly searching for something that doesn't exist, like a flawless, idealized partner.
She even compares dating to job interviews, which, who wants to feel like they're constantly being judged and assessed?
I know, it takes all the fun out of it.
Totally.
And then there's the whole issue of ghosting, which she illustrates this so vividly by referencing the still face experiment.
Okay, the still face experiment. Tell me more about this.
Okay, so it's this classic psychology experiment where a mother interacts playfully with her baby, and then she suddenly goes completely still and unresponsive. The baby tries everything to re-engage her, but eventually just breaks down in distress.
Oh, wow. That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But I see the connection to ghosting now.
Yeah.
It's that same feeling of, like, being suddenly abandoned. You're left feeling confused and hurt.
Right. It's this powerful reminder that we're wired for connection, and the sudden withdrawal of that connection can be so painful.
So how do we navigate this complex dating landscape without falling into that trap of romantic consumerism? Like, how do we know when we found someone who's not just, good on paper, but truly a good fit?
Peril, she distinguishes between chemistry, which can be fleeting and superficial, and compatibility, which is that deeper alignment of values and goals and personalities.
Okay.
And she asks this thought-provoking question: are you looking for chemistry for a love story or a life story?
That's such a good question. Like, are we seeking that initial spark that might fizzle out? Or are we looking for a connection that can, withstand the test of time?
Exactly.
It makes me wonder if we're so fixated on that initial spark, that maybe we're overlooking relationships that have the potential to grow into something really special.
Right. And that's where the fear of settling comes in. You find someone kind, stable, supportive, but then there's this worry, am I missing out on that passionate spark?
It's that nagging feeling of there must be more out there.
Yeah.
That keeps you from fully committing.
It's so true. And Perel, she actually cautions against this grass is always greener mentality.
Yeah.
And she reminds us that, the more you have this notion of perfection, the higher you can fall.
So how do we move beyond that fear and recognize the value of kindness, stability, genuine connection? How do we know when we found something truly special, even if it doesn't fit our preconceived notions of what love should look like?
Yeah. I think it starts with shifting our perspective. Instead of viewing partners like products on a shelf, we need to appreciate those unique qualities that each person brings to the table.
I love how she calls it romantic consumerism.
Right.
It's so true. We've gotten so used to, evaluating and comparing. It's like we're shopping for the best partner instead of recognizing the inherent value in every human connection.
Yeah, it's like we're looking for that perfect product instead of, a real flawed, beautifully complex human being.
Right.
Sure.
And when you put it that way, it seems kind of silly, doesn't it? Nobody's perfect. And expecting perfection in a partner is just like setting yourself up for disappointment.
Oh, absolutely. And it prevents us from seeing the beauty in those imperfections. Those are the things that make our partners unique and lovable, right? It's those quirks and vulnerabilities that often make a relationship interesting and allow for real growth.
So if we're not looking for perfection, what should we be looking for? What are the signs that we've found something real, something worth holding on to?
Perel, she suggests looking for curiosity, that page-turner feeling where you're genuinely interested in learning more about the person, having more conversations, going on more adventures together. It's not about waiting for that instant, overwhelming spark,
Right.
It's about a deeper sense of connection that kind of unfolds over time.
It's like you're approaching the relationship as an exploration,
Yeah.
a journey of discovery,
Total.
rather than expecting it to be this, finished product from day one.
Exactly. And it requires us to let go of those preconceived notions of what we think love should look like, right?
Right.
It's about being open to the unexpected and allowing the relationship to kind of unfold organically.
And Jay Shetty, he shares this beautiful story about how his wife challenges him in ways that are supportive and loving rather than critical or judgmental. He actually says, I feel like I found the person who has helped me continue self-evaluation in a way that I would have avoided with someone else.
Wow, that's powerful. It really highlights how our partners can be our greatest teachers.
Right.
If we're open to learning and growing.
It's about finding someone who sees you, who
Mm-hmm.
accepts you, and inspires you to become the best version of yourself.
Yeah.
And it's not about finding someone who completes you, but someone who helps you become more whole.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And it's about recognizing that love is a dynamic process. It evolves, it changes over time, just like we do.
I think that's such an important point. We often, enter relationships with these idealized expectations.
Right.
But the real magic happens in those moments of vulnerability, in growth, in transformation.
It's in those moments when we allow ourselves to be influenced, to learn from our partners, and to become more than we were before.
I love that. It's about choosing growth over ego, vulnerability over defensiveness.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our partners can be our greatest allies on that journey of self-discovery, and that the most fulfilling relationships are the ones that challenge us to become more ourselves.
Wow, this deep dive has been such an eye-opener. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on love and relationships. Esther Perel really challenges us to think differently about how we approach connection, both with ourselves and with others. What resonated with you the most from our deep dive today? What will you do differently in your own life? Keep exploring, keep growing, and until next time, happy diving.